Welcome to True Crime Threads. Today we dive into a mother-in-law's deadly obsession with her son-in-law. Mary had always been the epitome of grace and warmth. She was the type of woman who hosted family dinners, decorated the house for every holiday, and made sure everyone felt welcome in her home. As a devoted wife and mother, she prided herself on the close-knit bond she shared with her daughter, Patricia. Their relationship was one of mutual respect and love, or at least that's how it appeared to others. But beneath the surface, a different story was unfolding. When Patricia married Lucas, a kind and hard-working man, Mary was initially pleased. He seemed perfect for her daughter, successful, intelligent, and respectful. The couple's life together seemed to promise happiness, and Mary was eager to welcome Lucas into the family. At first, everything appeared to go smoothly. They would have dinner together on weekends, exchange holiday gifts, and Mary would often invite them over for small family gatherings. Patricia seemed genuinely happy, and Lucas was eager to please his new mother-in-law, never suspecting the darker side of her. But as time passed, something started to shift in Mary's attitude. Her admiration for Lucas began to take on a possessive tone. She had never felt this way about any of Patricia's previous boyfriends, but with Lucas, it was different. He wasn't just her daughter's husband, he was someone who had stolen her attention, someone who now occupied a significant space in their home and in Patricia's life. The subtle hints of jealousy crept into Mary's thoughts. It wasn't just that Lucas had become a central figure in her daughter's life, it was that Mary felt he was overshadowing her, that Patricia was beginning to pull away from her mother as she grew closer to her husband. At first, Mary tried to dismiss these feelings, rationalizing that it was natural for Patricia to focus on her marriage. But the more time passed, the more she found herself obsessing over the changes in their relationship. She began to notice little things: how Lucas would call Patricia babe at the dinner table, how they shared inside jokes, how their conversations seemed to flow effortlessly while she, Mary, often felt like an outsider. Her own daughter was slipping away from her, and Mary was not prepared for that. Lucas, on his part, had no idea what was happening. He was just trying to build a life with Patricia, and had no reason to suspect that Mary's seemingly harmless gestures of affection were masking something far more troubling. But Mary's growing obsession with Lucas would soon become a force she could no longer control. It was just the beginning of a dangerous path that would ultimately lead to tragic consequences. At first, Mary's actions seemed harmless, even caring. She started to visit Patricia and Lucas's home more often, claiming she needed help with little things around her own house. At first, Lucas thought nothing of it. He was happy to assist, seeing it as a simple gesture of kindness, a way to help out his mother-in-law. But the frequency of her visits began to increase. What had started as an occasional drop-in now turned into a weekly routine. She would show up unannounced, offering to cook dinner or help with housework. Lucas, polite and always eager to please, didn't want to turn her away. He didn't see any harm in it yet. However, what started as well-intentioned acts of kindness began to feel a little too much. Mary would linger in the kitchen longer than necessary, offering to do chores that weren't really needed. She would sometimes stay after dinner, chatting with Patricia, while Lucas, feeling more like a third wheel, retreated into another room to watch TV or work on his laptop. Despite his best efforts to ignore the growing discomfort, Lucas couldn't help but notice the way Mary's gaze would follow him when they were in the same room. There was a heaviness to her attention, a look that unsettled him, though he couldn't quite place why. Mary also began to offer unsolicited advice about Lucas and Patricia's relationship. She would make comments like, "It's so nice to see young couples so happy, but remember, there's always room for improvement." Or, "Patricia should make sure she's supporting you more, Lucas. Marriage is a two-way street." After all, these remarks, though veiled as helpful, were laden with an undercurrent of control. At first, Lucas thought it was just Mary's way of showing concern, but as time went on, he began to question her motives. The tension between Mary and Lucas grew in subtle ways. One afternoon, while Patricia was out running errands, Mary invited Lucas over to help her with some heavy lifting. She had insisted it was urgent, and Lucas, never one to say no, agreed. When he arrived, he found Mary alone, waiting by the door. She led him into the living room, where she had positioned a couple of boxes that needed to be moved. But instead of starting with the work, Mary engaged him in conversation, talking about her childhood, her marriage, and how she had always put her family first. She then shifted the conversation toward Lucas, how she had watched him grow since he married Patricia, how she admired his success and determination. As the conversation continued, Lucas began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. The way she looked at him was different now, almost as if she saw him as more than just her daughter's husband. He quickly excused himself, citing work, and left, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that lingered long after he was gone. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of Mary's obsessive behavior, a web that she would weave tighter and tighter around him as she continued her increasingly bold attempts to draw him into her orbit. Mary's obsession with Lucas only deepened as she began to carefully manipulate the situation, orchestrating ways to spend time with him alone. She knew that Patricia trusted her, and she used that trust to her advantage. Whenever Patricia was tied up with work or out with friends, Mary would call her, pretending to need help with something trivial around the house. It could be as simple as needing advice on a gardening issue or requiring help with an appliance that wasn't working. Mary always had a reason, no matter how small, for needing Lucas to come over. At first, Lucas didn't think much of it. He wanted to be supportive and didn't mind helping out, but over time these small tasks became more frequent, and the visits began to feel less like favors and more like calculated moves. He began to notice that Mary's requests often seemed more about creating an excuse for him to come over rather than genuine need. Yet, he continued to go along with it. He wasn't one to cause conflict, especially not with his mother-in-law, whom he felt obligated to show respect. The nature of their interactions shifted as well. Mary had always been warm and friendly, but now she would linger in conversation longer than necessary. She would ask questions that bordered on intrusive, asking about his work, his childhood, and his relationship with Patricia. The questions, while seemingly innocent, had an intensity to them that made Lucas uneasy. He would feel her eyes on him more often than he was comfortable with, and the way she spoke to him seemed laden with a subtext he couldn't fully grasp. One day, as Mary once again called him over for a small errand, he arrived to find her more animated than usual. She greeted him with a forced cheerfulness that seemed too bright to be genuine. After the brief task was done, she insisted on making him coffee and sitting down to talk. Lucas, feeling an odd pressure to stay, complied. It was during this coffee break that Mary let slip a comment that made his skin crawl. "You know, Lucas," she said, "I've always admired how strong you are, how focused and determined. You remind me of someone I once knew, someone I loved deeply." The way she said it sent a chill through Lucas. The words were too loaded, too intimate, and it was clear that Mary's feelings for him had begun to shift. He quickly ended the conversation and left, telling himself it was just a passing oddity. But deep down, he couldn't shake the growing sense that something wasn't right. Lucas tried to brush it off, hoping the tension would fade, but Mary's behavior only escalated. She started to show up at Patricia and Lucas's house more often, sometimes even staying for hours without any clear reason. It wasn't just about small tasks anymore, it was about her presence, her influence. Mary was no longer just the concerned mother-in-law, she was a constant fixture, manipulating every situation to keep Lucas within her reach. She made sure to position herself in ways that kept him from ever being too far out of her orbit. The more he tried to avoid her, the more determined she became to find new ways to draw him in. What had started as harmless visits were now transforming into something far more dangerous, and Lucas was beginning to realize just how entangled he had become in Mary's web. The tension between Mary and Lucas came to a head when Patricia, out of curiosity and concern, discovered her mother's hidden diary. It was tucked away in the back of a drawer in Mary's bedroom, where Patricia had never expected to look. When she stumbled upon it one afternoon, she couldn't help but open it. The first few pages seemed like a jumble of thoughts, ordinary entries about daily life, about family gatherings, and about Mary's musings on the world. But as Patricia flipped further into the book, the words became more unsettling. The diary revealed a side of Mary that Patricia had never imagined. The deeper she read, the more horrified she became. Mary's writings were filled with obsessive thoughts about Lucas' descriptions of him that went beyond admiration or even affection. Mary spoke of fantasies about him, her jealousy over Patricia's relationship with him, and her growing belief that they were somehow meant to be together. There were disturbing references to dreams where she and Lucas were living a life without Patricia, where he was not her son-in-law, but a partner, a lover. As Patricia continued reading, her heart sank with the weight of the words. Her mother's feelings had crossed a dangerous line. Patricia's mind raced as she tried to process what she had just read. How could she have missed the signs? Looking back, the odd comments, the lingering touches, the uncomfortable silences, all the strange little moments that had never made sense before now flooded her thoughts. It all made sense in a way she wished it didn't. Her mother, the woman who had always been a source of support, had slowly become someone else, someone obsessed, someone dangerous. The anger and betrayal hit Patricia like a tidal wave, but what shocked her most was the feeling of deep sadness. Her own mother had harbored these feelings for months, perhaps even years, and never once let on. Mary had always been the one person she trusted, the one constant in her life. But now it was clear that trust had been shattered beyond repair. Patricia confronted Mary that evening, her hands trembling with emotion. She didn't want to believe what she had uncovered, but the evidence was irrefutable. The conversation quickly spiraled out of control. Mary's calm facade cracked as the truth spilled out. She didn't deny it. Instead, she confessed to everything: how she had been plotting to break up Patricia and Lucas, how she had tried to manipulate their marriage from the inside. Mary spoke of her growing obsession, her belief that Lucas belonged to her, that their connection was meant to be. She even spoke of the desire to separate Patricia from Lucas so that she could have him for herself. Her words were chilling, each one more surreal than the last. The anger Patricia felt was beyond anything she had ever experienced. She couldn't even begin to comprehend how her mother could harbor such feelings for her husband, let alone act on them. In the midst of the confrontation, Patricia's heart broke as she realized the depth of her mother's delusion. As the arguments raged on, Patricia ran from the house, her mind reeling, her world now completely shattered. Later that night, when she confronted Lucas with the truth, his own sense of shock mirrored hers. He, too, had been unaware of the depth of Mary's obsession. The realization that someone so close could harbor such dark feelings left them both reeling. Though they vowed to distance themselves from Mary, the damage was done. The fracture in their relationship, one that had been caused by Mary's manipulations, could never truly be repaired. Patricia's mind swirled with confusion, betrayal, and heartbreak, knowing that her mother's obsession had now ruined everything. The situation reached its tragic climax when Mary, unable to let go of her obsessive desire, took matters into her own hands. Despite Patricia's attempt to distance herself and Lucas from Mary, the deep-seated anger and obsession Mary felt for him could not be contained. It was as if, in her mind, the end of her delusional dream was simply unbearable. She could not accept the loss of the man she had fixated on for so long. It began with a series of cryptic, unsettling messages that Mary sent to Patricia, each more erratic than the last. She wrote that she would make things right, and that everything would fall into place soon. These messages were vague but ominous, and Patricia, already on edge, felt a rising sense of dread. Something was coming, but Patricia couldn't quite figure out what. She tried to ignore the unease gnawing at her, hoping it was just a fleeting moment of anxiety, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. One morning, the news broke. It was a shock that reverberated through their entire community. Lucas had been found dead, his life tragically cut short in a violent confrontation that had escalated beyond anyone's control. The police reports were vague at first, but soon the details came to light. Mary had gone to Lucas's office that day, showing up unannounced and uninvited. She had somehow convinced him to meet her outside of work, under the guise of talking things through, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to finally set things right. But in reality, Mary was driven by a twisted need for closure, a need that could only be met by destroying what she could not have. Witnesses at the scene described a heated argument, a fierce exchange of words, but no one could have predicted the final, tragic outcome. In a fit of rage, Mary attacked Lucas, her obsession driving her actions. Descriptions of the confrontation painted a picture of chaos. At some point during the argument, a violent struggle ensued. It was clear that Lucas had tried to defend himself, but he was overwhelmed. Mary's strength, fueled by madness, had taken over. The confrontation ended with Lucas's death, leaving Mary standing over him, her hands stained with the consequences of her actions. Patricia, horrified by the news, could hardly comprehend the depth of her mother's betrayal. She rushed to the scene, only to find the man she loved lying lifeless, taken from her by someone she had trusted most in the world. The grief was unimaginable, but it was soon compounded by the betrayal. How could her own mother have done this? How had the woman who had once been her rock become the person responsible for destroying everything they had built? Mary was arrested shortly after, and the shocking truth of her obsession was laid bare in court. Her fantasies, her delusions, her manipulation, they were all exposed for the world to see. Patricia, though devastated, found herself struggling to find peace in the wake of such a profound loss. She would never fully understand the depths of her mother's madness, but she knew one thing for certain: Lucas was gone, and nothing would ever be the same. As Mary was sentenced, Patricia was left to rebuild her life, haunted by the tragic events that had unfolded, knowing that a mother's obsession had shattered her world beyond repair.